Why do we go through tests? Why does the loving God allow us to go through tests and trials and challenges? Religion would cause us to believe that we have to somehow prove ourselves to God. But in reality, isn't God proving us to us? Proving to us what we prioritize, what we hold most dear, what's most important. And isn't it about validating us for the greater things that God has? Take Abraham. Years before, God had made these outrageously good promises to Abraham. And God's not like you and I. He never changes. He does not change his mind. God's promises to Abraham and to you and I are his absolute, irrevocable commitment to us. But then the moment comes when God asks Abraham for the unthinkable. He asks him to take Isaac, the child of that promise, take him to this distant mountain and sacrifice him to God. And even though Abraham did not understand, he responded and he began that journey. And what we see later is what he said was he believed even if God had to raise Isaac from the dead, what he demonstrated was he prioritized God even over the things that he loved most dearly, but he also still believed God's promise in the face of what again is unimaginable. Our system, tests are about evaluating whether you're ready, whether you can handle it, whether you can pass the test. But it doesn't work that way with God. He already knows the beginning from the end. He already knows our every thought, how we will respond. Take Jesus before he goes to the cross. He tells Peter, you will deny me 3 times. But when you return, strengthen your brothers. Jesus knew how he would respond. He knew he'd return, and that mandate was still there. God's tests, those challenges, those trials are about validating who we are, what we prioritize, and validating us for those greater things. But there are a few aspects. One is the trial, the test, it reveals what we prioritize, what is most important to us. Abraham demonstrated quickly that God was more important. Obeying and responding to God was more important than even that child he loved so much. In the test, in the trial, we will begin to recognize what we prioritize, what is most important to us. That part of the process begins to show us the conflict, what is important to us, and what is out of alignment with God, his plans and purposes for us. Which brings up the next aspect. It does crucify what is out of alignment. But crucify, as bad as that sounds, as hard as that sounds, remember, refining is about exposing what is out of alignment. And then it either needs to be realigned or removed. But it also means we can cooperate with the process, that when we are in the trial, that we recognize what we prioritize, what's most important. And we can choose to align with God, his principles and his promises, his purposes for us. And in doing so, it automatically will expose and deal with those things that are out of alignment. And ultimately, it's about validating us for God's greater. After Abraham responds, God gives Abraham the substitute sacrifice for Isaac. But he also says something else. Because you have not withheld, because you did respond, basically. He reiterates the promises that were made years later and expands upon them. So practically, how does this relate to you and I? How do we respond to this? The trials, the challenges in our life, whether they are clearly God orchestrated, or even if it's the result of others' actions, it's still the same. God knows the beginning of the end. He knows you are ready to handle it, even though it may seem overwhelmingly challenging. And it's not about setting you up to fail, but about validating you for His greater. That test, that trial, that challenge, whether it's in your life or the ones that will come in the future, they're about proving who you are in Him and what you prioritize. And it's time for us to proactively respond to those challenges rather than enduring, approaching the process with the understanding about it's validating us and that we want to prioritize and align with God, His plans and His purposes, so that you are ready for that greater.